The 2023 Tennessee Titans had a disappointing season, but after an offseason where they got significantly better, there is a lot more hope and positivity surrounding this Tennessee Titans team. So today, I want to talk about the Tennessee Titans and why I personally believe that they are heading into the right direction as we head into the 2024 season. So the way I'm going to be doing this video is by breaking it down into a few segments. We'll start off by talking about why I like the future and the direction this Tennessee Titans team is taking, and then we'll talk about why maybe this team might not be able to take that big step next year and why they may be holding themselves back. And then at the very end, I'll give you guys my full synopsis on both sides of the story to give you guys my somewhat prediction as to what's going to happen this upcoming season. Let's begin. So like every video, I want to go ahead and start off by talking about the direct personnel of this Tennessee Titans roster because I think for the most part, it's a pretty solid roster all around. If you look directly in the quarterback position, that is probably the biggest question mark heading into the 2024 season. As of right now, Will Levis will be your starter barring any injuries, and I thought last year he had a lot of ups and downs. Obviously, he had that very great game against Miami and his very great opening appearance in his very first game, but he also has some struggles here and there. But I will say I do think he has a ton of talent, and I'm very excited to see what Will Levis can do in year two. The strength of this Tennessee Titans offense is going to be within their weapons. As it sits right now, your weapons are Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyler Boyd, Okonkwo at tight end, Tony Pollard, and Tyjae Spears in the running back room. And me personally, I think that is a very solid and honestly very great weapons core to have for a young quarterback. An experienced group of guys who may be getting paid a lot more than what I think they should get paid, aka Calvin Ridley. But regardless, they are experienced, they know how to get open, they know how to make plays, and a guy like Will Levis is going to benefit from that. The running back room is a little bit weird right now because Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears kind of play similarly, but what I will say is that I do think those two guys are explosive athletes and can definitely take some pain off of Will Levis's back. If you look at the offensive line, it is a much improved unit from last year. The right side of the offensive line can still use some work with guys like Dylan Raduns, Daniel Brunskill, and Lloyd Cushenberry, but I will say I think those guys are good enough to get the job done for at least next year and potentially a few years from now. Lloyd Cushenberry is a very solid center guy. J.C. Latham as your new left tackle, and I'm very high on J.C. Latham. I think he could be a fantastic player for this team. Everything that I've been seeing from him in rookie camps has been very positive, and I think him and Peter Skoronski as that left guard, left tackle duo is going to be one of the best left sides in the NFL. Again, the offensive line is not a finished product, but I do think it's much improved from last year, and it should be a very solid unit heading into the 2024 season. Defensively, I think this team does have a couple holes. We'll talk about that in here just a little bit, but I do have a lot of really good things to say about this defense, starting off with the defensive line. I know T'Vondre Sweat was a bit of a questionable pick in the second round, but I thought he was a fantastic player at Texas, somebody who knows how to get his job done when it comes to stuffing the run, and given the fact that was kind of an issue for the Titans last year, I think T'Vondre Sweat could easily fill in that nose tackle position alongside Jeffrey Simmons as a fantastic and large interior defensive line pieces. On the outside, you have guys like Arden Key, Harold Landry, Rashad Weaver, and Sebastian Joseph Day, and I think that Arden Key and Harold Landry are solid enough players to get the job done. They may not be special 15 sack per season type of guys, but those are guys who can easily get you 6, 7 to 11 sacks in a season. When you have a stud up the middle like Jeffrey Simmons, it does make the job a lot easier for guys like Harold Landry and Arden Key, so I do expect them to have similar seasons to next year as they did to last year. Going into the secondary, I'm a big fan of this cornerback duo of Chidobe Awuzie and L'Jarius Sneed. You also have a lot of young talent behind them like Trey Avery, Roger McCreary, and Caleb Farley. A lot of unproven guys and guys who I think could take some steps forward to be that cornerback 3 / competing for the cornerback 2 spot next to L'Jarius Sneed. But in terms of just the two cornerbacks they do have who are more than likely going to be starting with L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie, I think that is a very good dynamic duo in the secondary. Chidobe Awuzie has potential to play also in the slot cornerback room if you need him to, but I'm ideally going to stick him out there an outside corner next to L'Jarius. If Chidobe could just stay away from the injury bug, he has been a consistent, solid player for the Cincinnati Bengals. Coming out of Dallas, I was a big fan of him, and now that he's playing for the Tennessee Titans, I thought it was good value given how much they gave him. And then, of course, L'Jarius Sneed was fantastic last year, being one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL, and I think that he's going to be able to replicate that again for this Tennessee Titans team. So all in all, looking at the roster, it's a pretty solid roster. Does the roster have some holes? Yes, but we'll talk about those holes in just a little bit. The next thing I have to say that I like about this team is going to be the fact that they got a head coach who has experience at winning. Did I like the firing of Mike Vrabel? Not necessarily. I thought that he was a perfectly fine head coach, and I thought that he could have got the job done for this Titans team. But given the fact that they wanted to go with somebody who has some more experience with the Bengals system, and maybe he has some skill sets that Mike Vrabel doesn't have, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to go out there and get a different head coach. coach. Especially when you're talking about a roster that was kind of going through an influx of younger talent and trying to find an identity, it does make sense to potentially move off of Mike Vrabel. From what I heard, it didn't sound like it was a fantastic divorce between the head coach and the organization, so it makes some sense if there was some influx of frustration between those two guys. Regardless, they got a guy who I'm not the biggest fan of, but I do think that given the fact they want to build an offensive line and that they want to build a winning culture, I do think he could be good enough for them. Real quickly, I do want to go back to Will Levis to talk a little bit more about him. I think it is a very positive thing that he has a full offseason to work with the weapons around him, as well as just getting more experience at the NFL level now that he's a second-year pro. Coming out of Kentucky, he was thought to be somebody who was an early first-round pick before he ultimately fell in the second round. And I think last year we saw a lot of the reasons why he did fall to the second round was just a ton of inconsistencies. But when he was playing at his top level, he was playing like a very solid quarterback and a franchise-level quarterback. I don't want to say that 2024 is a make-or-break season for Will Levis, but it could potentially be that way. But that's just because the Titans didn't invest a ton of draft capital on the guy. This is not a first-round pick, so there isn't as much of a commitment to him as it would be if he was a first-round guy. But I think as long as he has a solid enough season and doesn't disappoint the fan base, I could definitely see Will Levis being the starting quarterback for the long-term future. But we went ahead and talked about the good. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the negative things that I don't love about this roster. We'll start off with some personnel and then talk about sort of the bigger picture of things. Looking at the personnel offensively, as I mentioned earlier, the offensive line isn't particularly special quite yet. J.C. Latham and Peter Skoronski are special, and I do think Lloyd Cushenberry can be a very solid center. But the right side of the offensive line is a little bit questionable with Daniel Brunskill and Dylan Radunz. I think if you heard through the media about the Tennessee Titans offensive line, you would think it was just this god-awful unit. When I feel like at times it could be a little bit overstated, the production of that right side of the offensive line. I don't think it's as bad as they make it out to be, but I also wouldn't say it's a strength on this team per se. So just take that as you will. The next thing I don't love about this team is going to be their linebacking core and their safety core. As it's right now, your two linebackers who are more than likely going to be playing in that middle linebacker role is going to be Kenneth Murray and Jack Gibbons. It could also potentially be a guy like Cedric Gray. And while I feel like Jack Gibbons has shown some flashes here and there and has had some good plays in coverage and within the run stuffing department, I'm just not quite sold on Kenneth Murray. Kenneth Murray for the LA Chargers has always just been this super inconsistent player who at times can make a flashy play but also can get out of position so quickly. And when last year your linebacking core was really solid with Azeez Al-Shaair, I think it's a big downgrade to go to a guy like Kenneth Murray. Those guys play kind of similarly to each other, but Azeez Al-Shaair is just a lot more consistent and also won't kill you on any given down, whereas a guy like Kenneth Murray can genuinely kill your entire defense at certain points. Do I feel like he's bad enough to where you're going to bench him throughout the season? Probably not. I think you kind of have to start him. But I am very intrigued to see if he could take that next step into becoming a very good linebacker in this league, because thus far it's just been far too inconsistent and far too many bad moments. And then in the safety duo, I just don't think it's a very particularly great safety combination. You have Elijah Molden and Amani Hooker. Amani Hooker primarily playing in more of that strong safety position, with Elijah Molden primarily playing in the free safety spot. And I'm just really not blown away with that safety combination. Fortunately for defenses, especially in a 3-4, the safety isn't necessarily like the biggest kill buzz on a defense. Like 90% of teams are more than fine with having an average safety but fantastic cornerback play, so it's not like it's going to kill this defense. I just particularly think that if you could go out there and get a top tier safety, then I think go right ahead. But of course, given the fact the draft was not full of a ton of safety prospects and you probably don't want to spend big money on a safety like a Jeffrey Simmons, it does make sense that they just stick with these two guys. Again, they can get the job done, and I don't think they're particularly bad per se, but if I had to compare it to other units, I would say it's a fairly weaker safety combination. The next thing, and it's more of my bigger picture point I want to make out here, is that they're playing in a super stacked division, and not to mention they have a brutal schedule, which we'll talk about here in just a second. When you're playing in the AFC South with some freaking awesome teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Houston Texans, and the Indianapolis Colts, it's going to be very difficult for you to stand out, because the Colts and the Texans in and of themselves are way more talented than this Tennessee Titans team. Even though I think the Titans have more proven players at this point, the Colts and the Houston Texans are just fantastic. I personally do think the Indianapolis Colts and the Houston Texans will both make the playoffs pretty easily this year, so you already have two teams within the division who are going to be making the playoffs, and you have to play those two teams 4 times. And then you have the Jacksonville Jaguars, who may have taken a step back last year, but are still a very good team, and you still also have to play them twice this year. So that in and of itself is 6 just brutal games. When you look at the rest of the conference in general, the AFC is also really stacked. In the AFC East, you have 3 contenders with the Bills, the Dolphins, and the Jets. The AFC North potentially has 4 contenders with the Steelers, Browns, Bengals, and Ravens. And the AFC West is probably the weakest of the 4 divisions, but the Chiefs are still the defending champs. The Raiders should be a better team this year, and the Chargers should also be better than they were last year. And then, as I mentioned, you also have 2 contending teams within your division, and of course, Jacksonville can be very good next year as well. So all in all, that does potentially move you back a couple steps from where you want to be, given the fact that the AFC and the AFC South more specifically are just really freaking good. It also doesn't help this Titans team because their schedule is freaking hard, because they have the Chicago Bears week 1, the Jets week 2, the Packers week 3, and Dolphins week 4, and then you have your bye week as early as week 5, which is criminal in my opinion. Those first 4 games are brutal, but then after your bye week, you have the Colts, the Bills, and the Detroit Lions, which are 3 just tough matchups. Then it does get a bit easier with the Patriots, Chargers, Vikings, Washington Commanders in week 13, the Jaguars, and then you have the Jaguars again in 17. But then you have Houston in week 12, Cincinnati in week 15, the Colts in week 16, and then Houston again in week 18. And to me, that's just a brutal schedule. Now, granted, yes, you're going to win a lot of those games that are hard games because it just happens to be the case that everyone's going to predict the Titans to lose those games when they'll probably win a couple of them. But it's just really hard to imagine that this Titans team is just going to have a cruise within their schedule, because it is a freaking tough schedule, and I think it's going to be very hard for them to succeed within it. But now that I gave you guys my good and the bad, let's talk about where do I think this Titans team will be in 2024. I think they'll take a step forward from last year. I don't think they'll be 4th in the AFC South, and if they are, I still think record-wise they're going to be a whole lot better than they were in 2023. Given the fact that this is a much more talented team with a lot more proven players, I think this team could be really solid next year and a very rough outing for any team that they come to face. But given the fact that this is a stacked AFC, a stacked schedule, and a stacked AFC South, I don't think the Titans are going to be able to quite yet make the playoffs. I think if Will Levis plays all right next year, I think this team probably wins 7 to 8 games next year, but with a great and fantastic Will Levis, you're talking about 9, 10, maybe 11 wins if you can really put together a nice stretch of games. Again, do I think this team has really good potential and really good players? Yes, I think they're going to be a really tough team for every team to face, but I just have a hard time saying they're going to make the playoffs next year, given the fact that their schedule is just so freaking brutal and the AFC South is stacked. But if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.